I am presenting Union Gospel Press's Sunday School Lesson number 6, Sunday, April 7th, 2024. The lesson is entitled Jesus' First Miracle. Lesson text comes from John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Related scriptures are John 1:35 through 51 and 20:26 through 31. The place is Cana. The time is 26 AD. This week we learn how God's creative word met the needs of a group of people who were celebrating a wedding in the village of Cana in Galilee. When Jesus meets our needs today, it should be motivation enough for us to fully trust him. Today's aim, facts. To describe the details of the miracle of water turned into wine at Cana in Galilee. Principle. To show that God's creative word can meet all our needs. Application. To encourage complete trust in Jesus, who is the creative word who can meet all our needs. Illustrating the lesson. Our response in any difficult situation must be to call on the creative word and believe in him. Practical points. 1. Jesus' disciples may freely celebrate God's goodness in this life and in heaven. John 2, 1 through 2. 2. Though a prayer may seem trivial or impertinent, the Lord welcomes us to bring it to him, verses 3 through 5. 3. Those who are swift to follow Christ without question will accomplish his will, verses 6 through 8. 4. Many who depend on the Lord's bounty are ignorant of where it comes from, verse 9. 5. The Lord's provision is of supreme quality, verse 10. 6. God's miracles promote his glory and our faith, verses 11 through 12. Golden text. This beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him. John 2:11. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. The first is a common activity, John 2, 1 through 5. The second is an uncommon event, John 2, 6 through 10. The third is a special manifestation, John 2, 11 through 12. Introduction. The miracle recorded in this text is the first of 7 that John included in his book to give evidence of Jesus' deity. They are usually referred to as signs because the purpose behind them was greater than merely the accomplishment of the miracle. The Greek word that has been translated miracles in John 2:11 is semeion, which refers to an indication or sign of something. The same word is used in John 4:54 after the healing of the nobleman's son in Capernaum. It too was a miracle pointing to Christ's deity. A common activity which takes place regularly all over the world, a wedding, turned into an event unlike any other wedding ever held. There was a significant purpose behind what happened, though, and it turned out to be the first of many revelations of Christ's glory. A common activity. John 2, 1. And the third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Verse 2. And both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. Verse 3. And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus saith unto him, They have no wine. Verse 4. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. Verse 5. His mother saith unto the servants, Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it. The wedding, John 2, 1 through 2. It is not certain what is meant by the third day. The previous day mentioned by John was the day Jesus called Philip to follow him, 143. Thus, John 2 begins on the third day, verse 1. After that, according to some sources, the expression may be equivalent to our expression, the day after tomorrow. The majority of Jesus' early ministry was in Galilee. Here he was in Cana, which, according to John 21:2, was the hometown of Nathanael. A wedding was being held there, and Jesus' mother, Mary, was present for the occasion. The fact that she is mentioned before Jesus and his disciples indicates that she might have been a relative of the bride or groom, which would explain why Jesus and the disciples were among the invited guests. This was not far from Nazareth, Jesus' hometown, so he might have known the couple. Cana is not mentioned by any of the other authors of the New Testament. John, however, referred to it as the location of Jesus' first miracle. It is not known today where this particular town was located, but it is fairly certain that it was just north of Nazareth toward Capernaum. When a wedding was held in town this size, everybody was probably invited, and it would have been an insult not to attend. At that time, Jesus had only called 5 disciples, so these 5 were probably the only ones in attendance. Jesus' attendance and his actions at this wedding indicate his approval of the celebration. Images of Jesus as a dour-faced Messiah passing judgment on all his paths simply fail to account for the biblical evidence that he was completely at home in festive occasions. Jesus' life is the most profound statement ever made against joyless spirituality. The wine, John 2:3. Wedding celebrations in Jesus' day often lasted for a week, so it took careful planning to prepare for them. On this occasion, a social disaster was about to occur. Running out of wine would not merely be a source of embarrassment, it would be the height of disgrace and humiliation, as well as an insult to the invited guests. The unwritten laws of hospitality would be violated, and the host made to look ill prepared and unthoughtful. It was much more of a disaster than it would be in our culture. But that is exactly what happened on this occasion. They ran out of wine, and it was Mary who came and informed Jesus about it. She simply told him that they had no wine. We can only imagine the look of concern on her face, even though the statement sounds so perfunctory. One wonders whether Mary was the hostess for this wedding reception. If so, this would naturally be a great concern for her. The fact that she was mentioned before Jesus in verses 1 through 2 suggests this could have been the situation. Hospitality in the East was a sacred duty. A wedding feast often lasted for a week. To run out of wine at such an important event would have been humiliating for the bride and groom. The family of Jesus was not wealthy, and it is likely their relatives and acquaintances were not either. This may have been a low budget wedding. It is obvious that a critical situation had arisen, and Mary knew who could provide the solution to it. The way forward, John 2 4 through 5. In our culture, to respond to a woman, and especially one's mother, the way Jesus did would be considered extremely rude and disrespectful. In Jesus' culture, that was not the case. To address a woman as woman was a normal, polite way to speak, as can be seen by the several times Jesus himself did so. Matthew 15:28, Luke 13:12, John 4:21, 8:20. In fact, in John 19:26, Jesus again addressed his own mother as woman when he committed her future care to John. He was not being disrespectful in saying this. The rest of Jesus' response to Mary has been viewed many different ways by Bible students. It is difficult to know exactly what he meant. The main idea, however, seems to be that his thoughts and hers were not converging at that moment. Jesus seemed to be indicating that the time for him to fully reveal himself as Messiah had not yet come. But did she want him to do something that would reveal him as Messiah, or was she simply trying to get him to meet a critical need? Homer Kent observed, "It can hardly be that Mary was asking simply that a miracle be performed, for in some sense Jesus seems to be rejecting what Mary asked, and yet he proceeded with the miracle. It is better to understand that Mary was hoping for Jesus to give the supreme manifestation of himself, perhaps to remove the suspicion of impurity that must have hovered over her those many years." Despite Jesus' response, Mary was not in the least deterred. She immediately turned to the servants and said, "Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it." John 2:5. She knew that her son could not be aware of such a critical need and just ignore it. We can imagine her walking away with a contented smile on her face, eager to see what would happen next. An uncommon event, verse 6. And there were set 6 water pots of stone, after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. Verse 7. Jesus saith unto them, Fill the water pots with water. And they filled them up to the brim. Verse 8. And he saith unto them, Draw out now, and bear unto the governor of the feast. And they bear it. Verse 9. When the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, he knew not whence it was. But the servants which drew the water knew. The governor of the feast called the bridegroom, verse 10, and saith unto him, Every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse. But thou hast kept the good wine until now. Putting water into pots, John 2, 6 through 7. There were 6 stone water jars in the home where the wedding celebration was being held. Mark 7, 3 through 4 explains how they were normally used in the homes. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they washed their hands oft, eat not, holding the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the market, except they wash, they eat not. And many other things there be, which they have received to hold, as the washing of cups and pots, basin vessels, and of tables. These were various ritualistic washings that were important to the Jewish people and were ceremonially followed in obedience to their customs. The ceremonial law of the Jews stated that they were rendered unclean by touching things in their everyday activities, so they needed to be cleansed before meals and other events. Water from a jar would be poured over their hands in the symbolic gesture of washing away any impurities they had picked up in their daily contacts. The capacities of the jars mentioned in John 2:6 was 2 to 3 firkins, which amounts to 20 or 30 gallons per jar, since a firkin was about 10 gallons in our measurements. If all the water was measured into wine and not just that which was drawn out, there would be 120 to 180 gallons of new wine available for the guest. When Jesus told the servants to fill the jars with water, they filled them completely to the brim. There was no way even small amounts of wine could be added to the water. At the time of the miracles, the jars contained nothing but water. Serving the Master, John 2:8. Our Lord's first miracle was not a spectacular event that everybody witnessed. Mary, the disciples, and the servants knew what had happened, but nobody else at the feast had any idea that a miracle had taken place. His first miracle was a quiet event at a wedding, in contrast to his last miracle recorded by John 11, a public event after a funeral. Jesus had not attended the wedding for the purpose of doing a miracle. After the jars had been filled to the brim, Jesus told the servants to draw some of the water out and take it to the person in charge of the banquet, whom we might call the master of ceremonies. We are not told the exact moment when the water became wine. Did the servants obey with some amount of trepidation, fearing the wrath of the master of ceremonies upon being insulted with water? By the time they drew it out, did they realize what had occurred? If so, instead of trepidation, they would have been filled with excitement. What we see for certain is that the servants did exactly as Mary had told them and obeyed what Jesus told them to do. The master of ceremonies would have been the person in charge of the seating and serving. So if a shortage of wine occurred, it would have been his responsibility to inform the wedding couple, their parents, and the people in attendance. If the servant suddenly served him water in front of all the guests, he would be terribly embarrassed and they would be humiliated. Their action thus required some faith. The text does not describe the moment of truth when the master took the offered beverage and drank. We can imagine, though, the look on his face as he tasted what was now fresh wine, asking for an explanation. John 2:9-10. Some people are troubled by the fact that Jesus provided wine for the wedding guest. Many scholars argue that the wine of that day was fermented by heavily diluted with water and thus not the kind of drink that could easily produce drunkenness. Other scholars understand the wine that Jesus miraculously produced to have been pure grape juice, free from any alcoholic content. What we ought to focus on, however, is the fact that a miracle took place on this occasion that revealed Jesus' deity to those who witnessed it. The master of ceremonies did not know where this wine had come from, even though the servants who handed it to him did. The water jars were evidently not in the room where the celebration was taking place, so no one in that room had witnessed the scenes leading up to this moment. The master immediately summoned the groom. The logic he presented to the groom makes good sense. As he explained, most hosts serve the best wine at the beginning of a feast or celebration. Only after people had enjoyed the good wine and consumed all of it was the cheaper wine served. He could not understand why this groom had reversed that practice by serving the best wine last. The groom, of course, would have been totally surprised, for he had no idea where that last wine had come from. A special manifestation, verse 11. This beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him, verse 12. After this, he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brethren and his disciples, and they continued there not many days. We noted earlier that Jesus chose to include 7 specific miracles in his book in order to present as John as Jesus as the Son of God and reveal his deity. The word semeion, which means an indication or sign of something, is used in John 2:11 and is translated miracles. When Jesus turned this water into wine, it was the first of many times when he did something miraculous that proved he was more than a mere human being. For those who witnessed it, this was a sign. John's recording of this miracle also makes it a sign for all of us. The way everything was accomplished to reveal something extraordinary, something not possible by human means. Filling the 6 jars with water ensured that this was a miracle and not a trick or an accident. Taking the wine from the jars to the master of ceremonies guaranteed that the miracle was made known and the social disaster avoided. But more than that, the miracle revealed something about Jesus. As we read this and contemplate what Jesus did, something that only God could do, he was not just a man, he was the Son of God. In accomplishing this miracle, Jesus revealed his glory. This was the work of the Word who took on flesh, the one who is described in John 1 as the creator of all that exists. The first result of this miracle was belief in him in the hearts of his disciples. This belief would be tested in days to come, and there would be much more spiritual growth. But at this point, they needed to understand that they were indeed following the Son of God. From Cana, Jesus went to Capernaum, which became the home base from which he reached out in his ministry. Instead of staying in town most of the time, he left often and traveled to other places. Questions. 1. In which town do we find Jesus and his disciples on this occasion, and who was already there? John 2:1. 2. What does Jesus' attendance of the wedding tell us about him? 3. Why was the shortage of wine of such a momentous concern? 4. Who was the person who reported the problem to Jesus, and why might it have been of special concern to her? 5. How did Mary respond to what Jesus said to her? 6. Why did the servant's obedience to Jesus' instructions require faith? 7. What was the response of the master of ceremonies when he tasted the wine? 8. What does Jesus indicate was the purpose of Jesus' miracles? Chapter 20, verses 30 through 31. 9. How does the miracle of Cana fit into that purpose? 10. What response came from the disciples of Jesus? What response should come from us? This concludes the Sunday school lesson for Sunday, April 7th, 2024. Thank you for listening. God bless.